everyone. I'm Amanda Bickerstaff. I am the CEO and founder of AI for Education. We are really focused on the responsible adoption of AI in education institutions, both in the US and internationally. I'm really excited to have you all join with my wonderful guest, Dr. Hartman, who we're really going to be diving into this idea of bridging the digital divide with AI, with generative AI as the ultimate focus. This is a really exciting topic, but we want you guys to please get involved. So if you haven't already, please put in the chat where you're from, who you are. We've had such an amazing group of international attendees through this webinar series. So just excited to have that opportunity for you to learn from each other. And then also, if you have any great resources, we are talking about the digital divide. So if you have a great resource, a reading, an activity, something that you've seen that's really supportive, please share it with your colleagues. This is like our own little professional learning network. So we always find that to be really great. And it looks like the chat is disabled. So Dan from my team will enable it. And thank you everyone for letting me know that. I was wondering why it was a bit quiet. But thank you for everyone for doing that. And then this is part of our AI Launchpad series. So this is our 9th webinar. And some of you have been here with a couple of them, but it's pretty exciting. We have a couple more coming up. We have creating AI resistant assessments. So you actually get a deep diving into what this means for the next school year. We'll have a teacher perspective, a STEM educator piece, a back to school strategies with actually a principal, a teacher, and a student from the same school, which is pretty exciting. And then an all-female panel that's going to be focused on AI ethics and responsible adoption. So, but without further ado, I am so absolutely thrilled to have Dr. Hartman here, or Phil. I have to say that I will fangirl just for a moment. This is pretty amazing. Once I got started with thinking about and starting to share with generative AI, I just saw Phil's work over and over again with this amazing, thoughtful approach that took really technical pieces of what generative AI was and is, and then put them into a practical framework of how to adopt it and how to think about it responsibly. So I'm really excited to have her here. And so I always like to start with, can you introduce yourself and then talk about your first kind of formative experience with generative AI? What did you do? Was it a prompt? Was it some kind of experience that made you want to do this work?
Yeah, thanks, Amanda. And hello, everyone. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for the invitation. Always up for talking about AI, particularly the digital divide, which is my most, I don't know, the thing I'm most interested in / worried about right now. So it's great to talk about this. But yeah, I've been researching education for a long time now. I'm very old, maybe 25 years now. I've been researching basically what's the formula for an optimal learning experience, if such a thing exists. And so I first came into contact with AI actually many years ago, because AI has actually been around in education for longer than most of us think, certainly longer than I thought. So yeah, it was probably a good few years ago when AI generally conceived. I came across the work of, for example, the University of Georgia Tech and their Jill Watson bot and this kind of thing, and their social agent and blah blah. But in terms of generative AI, really towards the end of last year, along with everybody else, it exploded onto the scene. And my first interaction with it was, of course, to ask it to design me a course. So it was a prompt, very badly written prompt. I have kept it, I've got it. And it was a very interesting experience. So yeah, it was Chat GPT. I feel like this is going to be the way that everybody starts conversations now. Don't ask about holidays. What was your first interaction? So it was Chat GPT 3 in about December. And I asked it to design a course and it didn't do a great job. And I thought, phew, I'm not out of a job.
Well, you know what? I do actually think it's funny that you kept it as a little memento of how badly we could, your first prompt and how badly you did. My first prompt was a rubric actually, and it did it really well. But then we did the same prompt, a better version actually in a live webinar, and it failed 4 times in a row for 4 different reasons. And so it is kind of interesting how, these, even the way that generative AI is changing, it really kind of has this, a bit of it's not magical, but it kind of feels like sometimes it works really well, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it feels like you've got the right prompt. Sometimes, you can't get it to do anything. And I think that's really an actually good start to this conversation. This is such an advancement, and it's, generative AI is not just a step change, but a magnitude change. But I want to situate our conversation in what is the digital divide? When you think of the digital divide, something you've been focused on for combating for a long time, what does that mean to you?
No, it's a great question. I think the answer is that it's changed a lot very recently. So traditionally, when I thought about the digital divide, like my motivation for being in education and thinking about what is the optimal learning experience was to try and then scale it, because we were getting MOOCs, we were getting whatever, but like we certainly weren't getting equity of access to brilliant quality education. So that was really what was motivating me. And the digital divide back then was access to education. So it's like, great. As long as we get people access to a phone, a laptop, and some 3G, then we're fine, And that was, to some extent, true. It's an oversimplification, but it was very much I think, an access to technology issue. Whereas I think now I've started increasingly actually to refer to it as the AI divide, because I think that helps to differentiate it from the digital divide and say, of course, there are issues here around access to AI tools. Already we've seen tools which started, back in the day when we did our first prompts, it was free. And now if we want the best version, we pay for it. So there is something still around that, and around having an internet connection to even get on this thing, things that sometimes we take for granted. But it's more complicated than that for me as well. So I think right now, the digital divide in my brain is an AI divide, which is about access to technology, but also about access to AI expertise. And access to, I guess, fair representation in data. So it's about knowledge and skills as well as technology.
Really interesting. Yeah, I think that, I was doing a bit of research before this and thinking through the digital divide. And for those that haven't met me before, I've done work both in the US, and I was the CEO of an ed tech in Australia. So I've seen what the digital divide meant before and after the pandemic. And one of the things I think about a lot is that there are plenty of places that actually it is still a digital divide. Like, there are plenty of rural areas in the US and Australia, just as two examples, that don't have bandwidth, that, and we have whole countries that are essentially mobile first, and that do not have, like some of these great tools that are designed for desktops, especially in education, are really inaccessible, or those that are high bandwidth. I mean, I think we've all had an experience where generative AI, we've used a chat bot and suddenly it's like, nope, not enough bandwidth. I'm going to poop out right now. And so I think that that's a really interesting question about the two pieces, right? Like there's a foundational digital divide that still exists, and it's something that is something that was potentially supported in, at least in education, during the pandemic. I know that we have a higher shift to one-to-one devices in the US now. There are at least more access to these technology tools and better bandwidth in certain areas. But then you're talking about something that's really quite different, which is this AI divide, which is like really, really new, but also potentially significantly more of a problem going forward, because we can now create with no money. You can create websites and games and music, but if you can't access the tools, and it's a question of who gets to create. So I'm gonna throw that to you in the sense of, like, when we think about where the generative AI divide is right now, like you talked about ChatGPT 4 being paid, but like what are the other areas in which there is this divide that's already here?
Yeah, and I think it is already here. So yeah, there is this like access to the best tools is a question of economics. So the more money you have, the more access you have to better AI already. The other place that I'm seeing this very powerfully in the UK and more broadly is a divide between the public and the private sector. So paid for and not paid for education. I'm actually giving a talk at Cottesmore School in the UK in a couple of months, which is like it's not very me, but it's a prep school. And it is so far ahead of where the state sector is at the moment. I'm also lucky enough to be on like a select committee for AI here. And we're still scrabbling with like, what do we do in September? Hair on fire, like we just need to ban it because that's the only way to manage this, because it's going to take 10 years to reform assessment. And so there's something about the private sector has been able to very like with more resources and more agility, been able to give both their teachers and their students more access to the best AI technology, but also the critical thing, the expertise. And so they bring in people like me, they pay them lots of money, and they train up the staff. And what that means is maybe more significant than I first realized. So I think what that means is, if we keep in mind what the World Economic Forum said about the future of work, what that means is we're seeing wealth concentration and increasing employment inequity, by which I mean, within the next 18 months, the best paid jobs are going to be somehow related to AI, be it using AI in your day-to-day work, or probably more importantly, building AI. And so we're seeing this like divide between those who can use AI and those who can build it and those who cannot. And again, that's just going to lead to more like algorithmic bias and like all sorts of inequities, which are like economic, social, cultural, political. So I think, yeah, in particular in education, it's there, and we need to do something about it now, which is why I'm going to go to Cottesmore with the Sutton Trust and talk about it in a couple of months. I think we also see it elsewhere. Like one of the stories that really, really hits home with me always is as like a warning of how real these dangers are, is how algorithmic bias, so the bias of the machine is just trained on, as we know, like human data created by humans, which is therefore inevitably biased. But the idea that, for example, in the US, people have died because of algorithms have been used to allocate medical resources, for example. The fact that already we're seeing with the like AI detection technologies, that certain types of students from certain types of backgrounds are more likely to be like accused of cheating than others. And so there's these biases in both, again, this kind of practical barriers to AI, but also like biases within the data that we've already built are, I think, already very evident in lots of different very important pockets like education and health.
Absolutely. There's so much to unpack there. So I'm going to kind of go a bit from the top and kind of think through. So, one of the things that's quite interesting is this idea of access in general. And R in the chat actually said this idea of like the models themselves could be degraded or less just based on the country of origin, the amount of money they have for, are we going to start seeing like Japan is building their own version of ChatGPT, and they're able to, it's actually quite funny. Japan, if you're anybody's from Japan, I was always impressed by how we think it's so technical, and then they still use CD-ROMs and fax machines. But now they're really, really embracing AI, but they have the money to put behind building their own walled garden approach, that means that it's really developed for Japan, versus other areas that don't have that wealth and that ability to create these very, very expensive, these things do not cost. Like, one of the things that's very interesting about this is that one of the reasons why we see a lot of costs associated with these tools is it's actually really, really expensive to run like the compute of ChatGPT or Claude or these things. And so it's not something like the internet. You could build like a SaaS platform, a software as a service, and just cost the money of like hosting it on AWS or something, and it could be pretty inexpensive to throw something up. But now it's actually, if you're trying to use ChatGPT-4, that is a significantly higher cost and to use. And it means that a lot of these tools have to be gated because they're not free to them. It's actually quite expensive. So there's one question about that. And we see it in the US as well. We see it in a lot of places, including in Australia, where there have been bans, like you're talking about in the UK, potentially in the public sector, because that's how it's being regulated. But then in charter school networks and also in private school and independent school networks, what you're seeing is a completely different story. You're seeing AI, like actual jobs for like AI operators, and you're seeing money being spent on not just training students, but also families. Like, there's so many really like kind of amazing things happening. But then when you look at their counterparts, which significantly have a significantly higher amount of students that they're impacting of diverse backgrounds, and just in general, you're seeing nothing. And in fact, it's being like, the only rhetoric we sometimes hear is like, it's just being used to cheat, instead of, like you said, this idea that it has to be adopted because, McKinsey just put out a report that said 80% of jobs are going to be potentially automated, and they're primarily going to impact women and people of color. And so I think that these are the types of things that I think about a lot in terms of when we talk about equity and like what this means in terms of generative AI. So, but I know we've become a little bit of gloom and doom. We'll probably come back to gloom and doom as well, because we're both really into kind of responsible adoption. But let's look at the other part of this. Okay. So I know we're both excited about this. I know this is what I think about all the time. I've gotten very boring, Phil. I think about this a lot. But like, what do you think are like the opportunities of generative AI to lower that digital divide?
Oh, I mean, they're massive. And yeah, like I get, it's quite an emotional roller coaster, isn't it? It's like 1 minute it's the end of the world, and the next you're like, but what if? And I think that's the point, actually, that, and I mentioned this to you, I know, earlier in the week, but I think it's an important point that sometimes I've noticed, I've been like analyzing the language of the AI conversation, the AI debate, and there's a lot of like conversation that imagines AI as this like beast that's unleashed and is like out of our hands and out in the world and growing of it. And I think that's not a fair way. I think actually, the reason that I'm able to get excited about AI is because we can make decisions about it. We can make decisions to build it and to regulate it in ways that mean that it can change significantly, like how people live, how people like whatever. So I think my particular focus, my particular area of interest is, well, how could it impact education, for example? And I really believe, well, I think there's on a very practical level, we're seeing already how AI can be a massive, can bring massive kind of productivity and efficiency gains. I think there was an MIT paper that said somewhere between 35 and 40% efficiency gains. So there's something about, having been an educator, a teacher for many years, I know that like me, my colleagues, teachers around the world struggle with admin. So there's something about the benefits of AI for teachers that's true of other roles, which is that those things that are repetitive and mundane and can be automated, should be, because they free us up to have, focus where we can add most value. So I think that's really exciting, the idea that we can focus teachers' efforts and energies. And then the other thing that I'm researching at the moment is the quality of education. So actually, I think sometimes we kind of default to this position that in-person education, like you're in a classroom or you're in a lecture theatre, is the best possible education. But actually, as like a learning scientist, as someone who studies how humans learn, that's not the case. And so for me, I've been wanting technology to get better for a long time. And for me, AI is a crossroads. It could go either way. The biggest, I've said this before, I'll say it again, but the biggest danger of AI is that it makes us more efficient and effective at bad, ineffective practice. So there is that world where we just do more slides and more lectures. But there's also this alternative world where we can scale these, and we do have formulas. So there are formulas, there are, you go to Harvard, you go to Cambridge, you get these brilliant experiences, which are complex, of course they are, and we don't yet know whether AI can reproduce them because we've not done enough human machine interaction research. But on paper, the hypothesis is that AI gets us closer to what we might refer to as like Bloom's 2 sigma model. So basically just one-to-one personalized support from the best possible person to help you to achieve your goal. And so I'm really excited about the idea that AI can help us to both design and to deliver like top shelf education experiences, which are hands-on, which are practical, which enable people like kids anywhere, adults anywhere, to reskill, to upskill, to whatever, just to feel fulfilled and be happy. But it is a decision. It's a decision that we need to make. And I guess one thing I'd love to stress this morning is that like that decision is in our hands, and it's a very political decision as to like which way it goes. But I think there are lots of other like wicked problems out in the world around like climate change, poverty, inequity that can be, helped, addressed by AI. But again, it requires us to lay those foundations right and to be intentional about taking it in that direction.
Absolutely. And I just to reiterate this idea of like this unleashed beast, watching there's a talk or a podcast that the head of Anthropic just gave, and he's talking about, when these tools come out, what they do, but the amount of times he said, I don't know, was really interesting in terms of how this technology was developed and how it works. And I think that there's a bit of like a question like that people have kind of like given up agency, or said like, we don't, like, it's faster. It was 25 years faster than we meant to. And extinction event and the things that people are saying that are kind of, they're pushing past, they're like pushing off this responsibility of the things they have created and put into the world. So instead of saying, hey, let's actually think about deep regulations, let's actually think about ways in which we can do this safely, that we can create evidence bases, we can create regulation that goes alongside this, and let's do it in an intentional way. You have instead, oh man, this is much more complicated. We don't really understand it. I'm going to create the space in which we can keep doing what we're doing, which is try to make money. But when in reality, like, there are these real opportunities. You could create systems that make sure that they identify a degree of confidence in an answer. There are all kinds of really, really important ways in which this can be regulated. Equity of access can be an underlying principle. Safeguarding like the ways in which these models are developed and shared. All of these pieces can be regulated. It's just a question of where's the will and intent? And I think that because I use the example of, Sam Altman with OpenAI saying, of course, regulate us. And then when he goes to EU and they're regulated, there's 92 statutes, and he gave back 92 versions that had taken down the level of regulation as their example. So regulate us, but like do it in a way that doesn't stop us from really growing essentially unfettered. And so I think that this is where it kind of comes into where you talk about this, like, let's be agentic, let's have these conversations, let's force these conversations so that we don't in 5 years say, oh, we just missed the boat and like now it's out of our control. Like, no, it's a technology. You can turn off data centers. you can like, it's not something in which we don't have control over. This is not Skynet, people. This is literally data centers. This is compute power. And I think that this is where I love what you're talking about right now, is that it is deeply a decision.
Yeah, it's a decision that we make. And to be honest, I am like, as a British person, I'm very sad that we're no longer in Europe. I was going to say I'm a very proud European, but I'm very proud like of the precedent that's being set there by the EU, that's saying we will regulate this beast. We will say that data has to have this amount of representation, and it has to be transparent. It has to be dependable. We're going to check for how representative it is. We're going to give you guarantees on your privacy and how your data is used. And it's just a brilliant example of how this, everything you've just said, Amanda, about like it being totally tameable, or the ability to do it responsibly in a way that is very intentional about it being reliable, safe, but also equitable. And I think, like, bravo to the EU for setting a precedent there, or for kind of shedding a light on the fact that it is possible if we want it to be. And I think there's a phrase in the UK called happy daft, which is where you pretend not to know something because it's very convenient. And I think there's a lot of happy daft knocking around at the moment in the world of AI, because, as you said, lots of people are making money from it being very flexible.
Yeah, hand over fist. I always think it's funny, like, if the axiom, if you're not paying for it, you're the product. And I think that this is really a very true case. Like, we're training, like, everything that we do, everything that we give, ChatGPT, Claude, any of these tools, like, we're actually giving our data and we're training these models, whether for good or bad. And I want to take the second point that you made about like the ways in which it actually could, like, there's two areas that you identified that I think are really important to reiterate. One is the administrative burden that teachers carry. If you're a teacher in the audience, I'm a former teacher, like Philippa is an educator, like, we understand deeply what it means to like be pulled in a million directions. And, I used to write 4-page narrative drafts of, lesson plans. I used to grade all weekend and not come out of my room. And so I think that there are these pieces in which the administrative burden is quite high and was exacerbated by COVID. But what I like about it is not only because you talk about automating the mundane and those kind of pieces, but what's cool is that, like, if I have an extra minute, maybe what I'll do is create 3 vocabulary lists for my ELLs, my students that are advanced and my students that are on task that I never had time to before. And I'm just going to do a little bit better job of meeting the needs of my students. And like, we of course do not want to replace all this extra time with more time, but I think that the quality of interaction, the quality of support that can happen with when you take down the extra 10 hours a week that happen within most teachers' lives, and that they're able to have more emotional and cognitive ability to focus on the classroom, to build things that are more differentiated and personalized. That makes me really excited. And they're not groundbreaking. Like things we talk about, the second piece we talk about, which is that 2 Sigma, like, looking at personalized learning, we're not quite there. We're still, at least a year out before there are really like strong, safe, reliable, fit for purpose tools that do that, which isn't too long. But in the meantime, even with just like some of these free tools, the quality of interaction in the classroom could really increase. And that would make me really excited. And we've seen examples of it already. But I just think that that's like I would have loved to have just a little bit more brain space and emotional space to work with my students. But I often, like, I'll be honest, I often didn't have that.
Yeah, and I think that's really common. And I think, a couple of things like that resonate there. One is absolutely like more time to focus on building the relationship, which again, we know from the learning science is like that affective bond, that ability to personalize learning, really, I guess. But to have teacher presence is like, I think it's very easy to like just underestimate the impact that can have on motivation, on retention, on achievement. So absolutely, like anything we can do to buy teachers time to automate the parts of the processes which are mundane, which are routine, I'm all for that. I'm also all for, though, and I know you referenced this, but like just for giving people time back. I think another thing I love about AI is that it's like so potentially mind-bending. And again, we don't really talk about these bits because I think it's quite convenient not to, but there is also a scenario in which, like, yeah, this takes some element of our jobs, but brilliant. And maybe there are different models where we actually just get more leisure time and we get more fulfillment, or we all go and have more time for whatever makes us happy, be that education or whatever. So I think there's that too, this idea that we all have to work, I was going to say 8 hours a day, but let's say, 18 hours a day and, 5, 6, 7 days a week, I think is one of the reasons that AI is politically very problematic, the idea that we might not have to do that anymore. And the other thing that I find interesting is that, like, I'm a historian by training, so I'm looking for historical parallels all the time. And I think where we've seen innovation before on this scale, probably like 19th century and steam, it was seen as progress. And I have a theory that was because it went for the blue collar jobs.
Right.
Whereas what's interesting now is it's going like AI is a different kind of productivity, which is not necessarily limited to. In fact, I think for blue collar workers, for working class people, this is potentially a great thing. It's like no longer do you have to do the crappy jobs that no one else wants to do because they're automated. So what now? Like what? And it's really interesting to see how alternative like routes into employment are emerging. So this idea of the new collar worker who can rapidly upskill in AI and suddenly become like an expert. That's another unprecedented thing that's happening. Like, yes, let's do this. So yeah, I think there's lots of interesting potential implications, one of which is a different use of time and one of which is more time back.
Yeah, there was a cheeky like billboard that said like AI didn't build this, like billboard, to your point about like the blue collar. And I think that you're right. And I actually really like this framing of this idea that there have been 3 epochs of computing. One is the microchip. So we have our laptops, right? And we have our desktops that allowed us to compute at the cost of 0. I could just buy the laptop and now I can go online and do what I need to do and like use it for calculator or, Photoshop, etc. The second was the internet, which took the marginal cost of distribution to 0, meaning like I could just build AI for education was a website. It was nothing more than a website and like some social media, and it became a company, which is pretty cool. But then now that we have generative AI, it takes the marginal cost of creation to 0. And so when you talk about like, if you take away these mundane jobs, like what are we going to create if we put in a place this opportunity where we can have these great tools that, when we talk about digital divide, like low bandwidth or no bandwidth, like large language models or tutoring agents, or, what are the things that we can build now if we're able to do that without years and years of experience with compute and computational thinking? Like, what can we do now? Like, I get so excited. I've seen 15-year-olds build tutoring agents. I've seen people build beautiful websites, front-end apps. People have put so much good, like so much interesting stuff into the world with so much less effort, and giving them that creativity and that agency. And I think that's really pretty cool. Have you seen any good examples of people building with generative AI that maybe wouldn't have before?
Yeah, I think so. Like, there's definitely a lot of educators experimenting in this space. So, for example, like just to go back to an example I used before, Georgia Tech and Professor Ashok Goel was the guy behind this project, but it was massive, and it was like a team of 8 people, and it took 4 years, and they built this Jill bot that was essentially based on Professor Goel's brain, and they did an experiment, and the students couldn't tell when they were in a discussion forum online whether it was the professor or the computer answering. In fact, the only reason they knew it was a computer was because it answered too fast, so they had to build it. But I've seen other teachers like rapidly build stuff like that, like, I mean, almost literally overnight. Like, if you have enough existing data about, I don't know, like communication between you and your students, or like, I don't know, answers to questions, then so it's just one example of how generative AI can be very empowering for teachers. But I think the other thing that I guess all of this that we're talking about depends upon is, and this is a critical thing for me, like I'm often asked, like, what's the one thing that you do tomorrow if you could do anything, is education. It's like, how do teachers know where the hell to start? And yes, the tools are getting easier, but there's so many questions around ethics, around safety, around privacy, around all of the things that we've talked about already. So I think many teachers are just too scared to go anywhere near the opportunities of building AI. And so if I could do one thing, it would be to make education about AI almost a requirement of students, of teachers, to be honest, just out in the community. Like, let's make sure that everybody equally has access to this expertise and this confidence so that we can start to play with it. Because I see a world in which AI is used to automate an amount of the teachers' administrative tasks, and maybe what they do with that spare time, as well as just having a cup of coffee and watching some soap operas or something, is to help build language models. Because who better than to build an education language model than teachers? But to do that, they need the confidence, they need the understanding, and what I'm seeing at the moment is lots of education institutions at K-12 and higher ed are in a panic. What's going to happen in September when our new year starts here, new academic year, and so they're kind of trying to leapfrog what is actually a lot to learn, and a change of practice, a change of culture. And so I think, yeah, the one thing I would do tomorrow if I could do anything would be to get some sort of concerted action by governments or whoever it is to get some sort of standard of education in place so that teachers are empowered to do the things that we're asking them to do without enough support.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that, it was quite funny. Yesterday I put up a LinkedIn post for this keynote I'm writing tomorrow that has this continuum. And it, everything from like, how is a school or system adopting? And it's like, wait to ban to self-guided to a school-wide or system-wide. It was interesting. We got a couple of pieces of feedback, like these are all couched in ways that adoption of AI is like positive, even though it's like, new and there are lots of risks. And actually, but to your point, I think that we can't ignore it. Like, and even if it has to be balanced and responsible, but to have no policy right now is actually a policy. And it's one in which like it actually can deeply impact what's going to happen, and create spaces in which we could potentially degrade the relationships between teachers and students because of the conversations that will be had around cheating, around trust, around even like I see teachers potentially getting called out because they're using like this technology to support their own practice and not spending the time like the way we used to do it. And so I think it's really like interesting that I think that for us we have to be really like kind of cautious and aware that there are risks, but we also have to be even more aware that to not actually do something is even riskier than it
Yeah.
being something that isn't quite ready. So I think that's really interesting. And like for us, when you talk about like everyone should have this piece, like we believe very strongly in AI literacy. Like we have, you know, curriculum, we have like, it's a lot of what we do, but like, how do we get, like, what kind of AI literacy should we be teaching? Because it's changing so fastly. I mean, we talk about prompt engineering as a skill, but is prompt engineering going to be a skill in a year? So like, how do you think about, like, I can talk about what we think about, but I'd love you to start thinking about, like, if you could ensure that everyone had a base level of AI literacy, what do you think is important to teach?
No, it's a great question because it is moving so fast. And we've seen already, like just this, I think it was this week, like the next evolution of ChatGPT now helps with prompting. So already like that's become outmoded. But I think there are some like fundamentals. I think the things that I would recommend are things around just some basic understanding of what AI is, as in it is a collection of data that's based on, like, that's generated by humans and that looks for patterns. That it doesn't have consciousness, that it like, why does it hallucinate? We all talk all the time about the fact that it hallucinates, but why, and what are the gaps? It's very actually similar to the conversation that we're having now around like just some basic understanding of how algorithms and machine learning works. And then, you know, people pretty quickly can start to apply that to their own context. And then I think the other part is the ethics part. Is highlighting how this has a very real impact on human beings and why, and therefore like how we should be thinking very critically about who's building this stuff, like, you know, those kind of things too. So they will be the two big things for me. Something about like the social, political, whatever implications, but also just very practically like, what the hell is this, in a way that's like, because in my experience, even if you just spend 5-10 minutes explaining some of those basics around like pattern spotting and stuff, people understand, you know, what this is, what the risks are, what the opportunities are, and this kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, I'd love to hear what you would consider to be like the priorities.
I mean, I think so for us, like when we think about what the two pieces are, there's like a training capacity building component, and then there's an AI ethics and policy component. And that could be your own policy of how you're using it, whether you're just an individual, a student, a teacher. And so when we think about the curriculum that we created, and the work, we have a free course as well, is that what we do is we focus on what is it, like you just said. So like actually creating a space in which you can understand what AI has been, and then what has become and where it's going, so that you can situate this within that. But then we do a deep dive into the difference between thinking versus computing. And we actually show how something could, like the chatbot is looking like it's talking to you and thinking like a human, but actually it's just predictive. And it's really easy to use games and other ways where a chatbot will cheat because it actually isn't thinking. It's just trying to like predict. And so it can't keep the thread, like it can't remember what it just did enough to actually go through like a celebrity heads game. And so it's a really good way to understand the difference between thinking and computing, and to show the risks inherent in trusting this as a partner, like a true partner, that you would go to a teacher, and if they don't know, they're going to tell you they don't know, which leads me to the next thing that we teach was around hallucinations. And so we talked briefly about this, but hallucination is is part of every foundational model. If it doesn't know something, which it doesn't really know anything, to be honest, but it will predict something, and it'll be very confidence prediction, and often it will be incorrect. And it's becoming more subtle how incorrect it is. It will look so right, and it will sound right, and it might just be 2 words off of a quote, or it might just, one of my favorite ones is I was watching something, and a professor that someone had, it said they wrote a bestseller and they had never written that book. It would be great. They were not a best-selling author. It sounded good, but they weren't one. So we teach about that so that you can become critical users of this technology. And then we also teach about like the idea of you can build your own policy. This has to be agentic. It has to be co-partnered. And so if you're a teacher, if you're a student or a leader, we want you to work together to actually understand how to think through usage. When is cognitive offload a good thing or a bad thing? Not just for a student, but like if you're a new teacher and you're not getting some of these skill sets of like building, like a unit plan it actually has some structure of that, of why you build it, because it's about putting the pieces together. And then if you go and do that, right, you're in a better chance of actually identifying what worked or didn't work the next time you do that, so that when you do use ChatGPT or another piece, you can better evaluate how effective that would be for your classroom.
Yeah, I mean, this is, yeah, perfect. It's so smart. And I think it resonates with me now, just thinking about it on a classroom level, which might be helpful for folks. Like, I decided in my classroom to embrace AI, but I have this, I guess it's the equivalent of your policy on an individual educator level. And my policy being like, you trust nothing and you validate everything. And also that part of your assessment is how well you have dealt with AI. How much questioning did you do? Did you look for it on like 2 or 3 different tools and get 2 or 3 different results? If so, you have to explain why. And so we've kind of developed this approach to the curriculum that's partly about developing the domain knowledge that you need to pass the thing, but also about creating people who, I think it's that really important point you make about critical consumers, but also critical builders of AI. And that for me is like the call to action to like the UK government. It's like, you need to make sure that the, these, it sounds corny, but like these kids, that all of the kids are coming up and through with the skills that we need, not just to like fuel the economy, but to make sure that they are, able to function. So yeah, and I think it's, I mean, I acknowledge as well, it's easier said than done to say, oh, just educate everybody and everything, but it's not impossible. And I would say it is critical. So I think that, and I know there's some great, like you're doing great work, and like deep learning AI are trying to, have AI courses for non-specialists, which are really cool. But I think there's a need for stuff that is more domain specific as well. So I think there's,
Totally.
that you're doing it specifically for educators and education, I think is a really great example, and hopefully a precedent that we can set.
Agree completely. And I think that what's really excited about this is that like there are just so many opportunities. I know that, like, so we're coming up on the 45-minute mark, so we're going to stay. And first of all, thank you to everyone in the chat who are having such a good time sharing thoughts, being collaborative, speaking like in positive ways around some difficult concepts. So I really appreciate that. If we have a couple questions already in the Q&A, so please put some more in there. We'll have 15 minutes to answer if you want to stay on with us. But I want to kind of wrap, this is talking about bridging the digital divide. If you have like one thing that you are most excited about, the possibility of generative AI actually bridging the digital divide, what is it?
I think it's the education bit. It's the fact that there is, for me, an opportunity definitely here that we haven't had before, or at least not in the like 20 odd years that we've been, I've been researching this, that we've not had before, to scale very high quality learning. And that's partly the power of AI, but it's also, for me, what's important is not the power of AI as artificial intelligence, but the potential of AI to scale human intelligence. And that's what I'm really excited about. Like, maybe now, we won't just, I don't know, transmit knowledge to more people. Maybe we can give these experiences to anybody who, these experiences which we know impact outcomes to anybody. And so that for me is it's the thing that I've wanted to try and achieve for so many years. I know that many people have, but I wonder, I'm kind of scared to hope, but I wonder if now is the moment, because things are also messy. And what I know is, like, from history, is that like big things happen when things are messy. Sometimes, like, I think the French Revolution was sparked by, like, I don't know, somebody killing a cat. And it's like, yeah, this is like there's a lot of chaos at the moment that feels interesting and disruptive. So I'm hopeful that this is the moment, but it will take this concerted and centralized action, and it will take us to take responsibility for the fact that it is a decision that we need to make either way.
I agree completely. And I was speaking earlier with someone around this idea of democratization of access to education being the thing I'm most excited about. There are places in this world where it is unsafe for people to learn, especially young girls. Like, it's actually unsafe for them to go to classrooms. And the idea that we can not only scale best practices, but can we do this in ways in which it's safe for people to learn and to actually have the same level of autonomy and agency to have these skill sets. Like, the idea of being able that, we know that when education is a main priority for a developing economy, you're going to see better outcomes across everything in that society. And it often starts with young girls and access. And so I think that it's really just so important to think about those opportunities. And when we build and you're creating these spaces in which they're culturally appropriate, they're contextualized, they're low to no bandwidth, which means you don't have to have steady access to the internet, and that they're unbiased as much as they could possibly be, because we know these systems are extremely biased and can become more biased pretty quickly. And so I think that that's what I get excited about. Okay, so if we're going to come right now, if you guys want to hang out with us, so we're both on LinkedIn, we're both very on LinkedIn, hopefully in a good way. This is how we met. So I just want to say, before people have to leave, like, I am so lucky to be able to do this work for all kinds of reasons, including those that have joined us today and have joined us for the series. But also I get to hang out with people like Phil, who teach me every time I read something. We have such a good time. I hope we get to meet in person soon, but please follow us on LinkedIn, connect. I've talked to people all over the world through these webinars, but just really appreciate you, Phil. Before we go to the questions, you just have been a pleasure, and you've helped me grow in my own kind of thinking around this as well.
Well, thank you, and right back at you. And thanks to everybody and for the questions. And like, this is great. And if we can continue to talk on LinkedIn or whatever, it's just great to be chatting with educators on the ground. I think that's really important.
Very cool. Okay, so we're going to go through some questions. The first question we got was from Syrian Boke. He says that when you made the classification of those who use AI, but those who don't, and those who build, are you thinking about like that in the sense of like these are educators or companies or both? Like when you think about that division that could potentially happen about not just the access to, but the building with AI?
Yeah, I think it's like the builders of the future. I think it's the people in the future whose jobs it will be to build AI. I think I'm thinking now about the students in the classroom that are getting access to the skills that will enable us to do that. So I guess it's like a social thing, an economic thing, because at the moment in the UK, and I know it's the same in Australia and elsewhere, similar, the people who are going to be building our AI tools in the future are so far going to be like upper middle class / beyond type people, which is whatever they are. Like it's one dimensional, and it's therefore not optimized. So yeah, that was the angle from which I was thinking about that.
Yeah, and I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, we there's a good question now, like these foundational models we talk about. OpenAI, Anthropic has Claude, Llama 2 is Meta. Is like, are these really going to be the major players that are going to kind of shape everything going forward, or will foundational models be easier to make and then potentially be more localized as well and safer? I mean, those are questions I think about a lot as well. Okay, so this is from Dare. I probably said that wrong. I'm apologizing if I did. But so how likely is it that older style ed systems can be persuaded to change their current models to make more room for social, SEL, PBL, and critical thinking, especially since we're going to see that there are going to be these approaches that are rendered obsolete. Like there is a possibility of everyone's going to be like, the blue books are coming back, oral exams only, like pen and paper. But like, what is it going to be? Like, do you think that the systems are going to be able to make that change?
It's a great question. And again, it's an emotional roller coaster, because there's one scenario in which it's like, at last. And so there's a lot of this debate around like education progress, like basically pedagogical innovation that AI might force us to do. There's not new. Like we've known for a long time that if we're going to deliver on the promises that we make as educators, which is effectively to produce like kids who are functioning adults who are, I don't know, critically minded, creative, have evidence-based thinking and this kind of thing, we need to innovate our pedagogy. We need our experiences to be, for example, more active, more situated in the real world. Employers are complaining already before AI that we're not producing people who are like world relevant. But for many interesting cultural, political, historical reasons, those institutions have moved very slowly. What I'm seeing is that this is different in flavor now. So there is in institutions that have evolved very little in 250, 300 years are now thinking about, what does this mean? And really there are like three choices. One is to repress it, so to detect it and count it as plagiarism. The other is to get everybody back into the room and then we just stick, but it kind of goes back a step because we're learning by rote. And we kind of do the exam, get the certificate model. But the third option is to embrace this. And I know that universities in particular were already under a lot of pressure to become more real world relevant. And I don't know if you saw it, Amanda, but I put a blog out recently on the blog of the London School of Economics saying, look, if you don't do this, you will die. Like, higher education is already dying. Education is an institution. Formal education is not fit for purpose. Hasn't been for a long time, but it's like more than ever. So I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that this is the moment, but I also think what we'll see is lots of different. I don't think there'll be one answer. I think we'll see some institutions are gonna, like the Russell Group institutions in the UK, for example, might make their unique selling point that we are traditional, in a room, ratio of 1 to 3 human part. Like, other institutions will innovate heavily and will have huge global hybrid approaches which are powered by AI, and then there'll be everything in between. So I think it will happen, but I don't know to what extent and where we'll see innovation and where we'll see like anti-innovation.
Yeah, it's really true. I joke, like, it could be one of those, like, we're not changing, like, we'll change or die, and educationalists will be like, we could die, right? Like, we could, like, this, like, like, and then really get to the precipice and like it's a fortune mechanism. And what we think of is that when we see change, when there's urgency, when there's like significant, deep, multitudinous reasons to change, like there has to be it from all sides. And you talk about higher education, there was already high cost with low low benefit. It was something that was not relevant. Like, it was becoming less and less of a meaningful, it's an indicator to industry, to hire, et cetera. But now, when the majority of the traditional assessments are no longer going to be like AI resistant, then you hope that is the tipping point that says, actually, now we need to rethink this pretty significantly. And then what you hope as well is that then, especially in middle and high school, I think we're going to have this really robust change in K-5, because there are all these really great foundational tools that will do individualized, teaching in the zone of proximal development with engagement as a piece, because these are actually rote things. Like, there are these things that make you a better reader and a better writer and a better mathematician. But then when they get to like 6th, 7th grade, where it starts to really shift into these more traditional models again of assessment, like, what does that become? And I think there's going to be this big question about, like, are we actually completely reframing education into something that is soft skill development, is creativity, collaboration, is industry focused even at a younger piece, but more around creation and actually doing that. And so I think that's really where we're going to see something pretty interesting. And hopefully this is that catalyst for, you can no longer be the ostrich with your head under the sand and say, I'm going to stay in this place forever. And, things are going to change around me, but we're still going to have a business model.
Yeah, 100%. And it's what for me is driving me and helps me stay on the up bit of the roller coaster rather than the down, is the fact that that's happening already. So in higher ed in the UK, we're seeing already innovation around assessment. So a shift from write me an essay to, the sort of assessment I described before. So assessment that embraces AI, but requires you to deal critically with it in the way that you would deal critically with any source. Like, it isn't that different, but also a shift to more kind of project-based assessment with more skills and behavioral based objectives and marking schemes. So the shift away from, can you regurgitate or reframe what I told you, to, can you actually do a thing and demonstrate skills? And as I said before, they're the things that we sell. They're the things that we say we will do. And so for me, this is a positive. But yeah, there is also a scenario in which, we will go back into a room and do an exam while someone watches us. But that's like, higher ed will die. Like, we know it has to grow, or like, it's not scalable right now. Certainly isn't scalable if you have to put every bum on a seat in a room.
Right.
So I don't think that's a viable option, but touch wood. We can
we're gonna both touch wood. Okay, so I think we only have time for 2 more questions, but I just want to say thank you to everyone for the questions. They're so good. I'm just gonna do a really quick one about ones that we can kind of do quickly. So we had a question about areas or regions of the world where ChatGPT was blocked. I know it happened in Italy, but I think it's more based on like systems are blocking it, and specifically in education systems and in types of bureaucratic usage. So that one is something that's going to change back and forth. And so I think we'll probably have time for like one more question. So I'm going to look at these and see. Okay, from Nima, this is a good question. No offense to everyone else has great questions. Please ask them on LinkedIn, send us an email. But Nima asked, you mentioned a digital divide affecting marginalized communities. What solutions do you see to address this? Also, why do you believe the jobs of people of color and women will be the ones most negatively impacted? I can take the second one just really quickly, and we'll share this tomorrow, but there was a recent McKinsey study around the age of AI and the impact. And they've identified about there will be a significant skills change, so to speak, and job change based on AI over the next 30 years. And they identified about 80% of the jobs that are going to be most affected originally are going to be those that women and people of color are mostly in. So a lot of services, a lot of even copywriting, lots of areas in which creative arts, et cetera, that are more heavily female and people of color. And so there will be new jobs, but there's a pretty good indication of the types of jobs that are skills that are being degraded or downgraded through generative AI, being able to do them very well already. So that's why I said that. But then to the other point, Phil, do you want to take up what do we have to actually support these marginalized communities with generative AI?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, very important. I think the answer is to make sure that marginalized communities are, I think, two things. One, have access to education, to the AI tools, of course, but also to the skills and to the expertise. I just think everybody needs access to that, but particularly marginalized groups who are already underrepresented. And then kind of related to that, make sure that they are involved in the building of models and the creation of data, and a part of the conversation that, for example, the EU Act recommends, which is auditing of language models and data sets to make sure that they are representative. And when we get there, that's the only way that we will get to truly equitable education, society, economics, is by being very intentional about making sure that those people are very centered in the creation of AI.
So this is fascinating. And Neem actually put this in, I was thinking about this as well, is that actually marginalized communities are a part of these models, but they're the ones having to do the worst work of it. So for example, what Nima just put in, there was the content moderators I think in Nigeria, were looking at they were training models on inappropriate content. So they were actually getting deluge of murder, the worst possible parts of humanity every day with almost no support and not a living wage. And so I think what we don't with marginalized people have been a part of these models, but they have been the part of these models in a way that is not agentic, that is damaging, truly damaging. And it's something that actually is the worst way we can use these people. And so I think that there's something to be said about what you're saying, is that we need to flip that, and we need to absolutely think deeply about how we ensure that people perspectives from different places, different cultural, ideas and mores and needs are not just supported, but actively sought out, and ensure that they are part of these going forward, and not just to look at the worst possible part, which is deeply disturbing.
Yeah. And again, just takes us back to that first point that we made around AI data is created by humans, and it comes with all of the biases that we bring with us, and it's been built by not marginalized, it's been built by the white majority, or at least the majority with access to building AI, and it's it's broken.
Absolutely. Okay. So Phil and I could probably, Phil and I are just going to go to, if we were together, we'd just be in a pub right now, and we're going to hang out, and we're just going to talk about AI and all these things, but we get to do it with you all. We just want to thank you so much. Again, please reach out to us. We're always happy to be able to be in touch. We'll send an email tomorrow with all of this information. If you we just really appreciate you all. It's just been a pleasure, but I also want to say thank you, Phil, for being such a thoughtful, amazing human being that's focused on the most important things that we need to be talking about right now. And I just appreciate you, and appreciate everybody here, and hope you have either a good night, morning, middle of the night, wherever you are. We really appreciate you all.